Hey everyone, it's Max here. Hope you're having a great week, ready for the weekend. It's Friday, and I want to hop on here and talk some news with you. Over the last few weeks, I've pulled some stories that I think are important, stuff that we should be tracking moving forward. And we'll jump right in. I only have 15 minutes on YouTube here, so we'll jump right in here and get going. But first, I want to cover the United States Postal Service saga, the USPS saga that we've been witnessing. There's been a lot of heated debate on both sides. And I think the issue ultimately surrounds mail-in voting, and given USPS would be facilitating that. But mail-in voting is very important, especially to the left or to the Democratic Party. To them, it's all about health and safety concerns with the virus, and that's why we should all be voting, by mail for our own safety. But really doesn't make sense. You see people out in restaurants, out in stores. You see people protesting en masse. Why can't we stand in a line and punch a few buttons and get out of there? So that really doesn't hold a lot of water to me. To me, the mail-in voting for the left is more about being able to control the outcome of the election. And it's no secret that mail-in voting leaves a lot of vulnerability to fraud and manipulation. That's been well documented in the past over the last several years. Just use common sense with this one. I mean, you rely on tens of millions of votes to be counted by people. I mean, that's going to take weeks and months, and the more time that goes by, that leaves a chance for all types of manipulation and ballot harvesting and all that. It's not a safe way to vote if you're worried about election integrity. But Democrats are really pushing for mail-in voting, I think, for that reason. And so that's kind of the backstory behind it. And then the more time that goes by after the election, if a certain amount of time goes by, Congress gets to elect an interim president in the meantime. So that would be a way to remove Trump and kind of have their way with the election. So there's a lot of vulnerability involved with mail-in voting, and that's why the USPS saga really ultimately revolves around that. But the issue's been with this new Postmaster General, DeJoy. Speaker Pelosi has kind of maintained that Trump and DeJoy, who is a conservative, so automatically has a target on its back, but DeJoy was elected unanimously by the USPS Board of Governors. And he's got the credentials to do the job. He has an amazing background in logistics. He's worked with the USPS for a long time. But the fact that he's a conservative and he's a Trump supporter gives credence to the Democrats to think that he and Trump are colluding to weaken the USPS to ultimately suppress voting, for their advantage and things like that. But again, that theory is really not holding a lot of water when you take a closer look at everything. But Kevin McCarthy has a really good piece on this, and he outlines that all the reasons why this is kind of a fabricated, what's the word I'm looking for? Scandal. And the USPS is rich in cash. They have access to 10 million more in cash, 10 billion more in cash from the Treasury if they need it. There's been folks on the left that have said, no, the USPS is in good shape. We don't, wouldn't worry about them not being able to handle the election. They have plenty of capacity and bandwidth to do though. So that article by Kevin McCarthy really lays that out well. And I'll send that over to you all. Another wrinkle in the whole USPS saga here is the discovery that the Postal Service filed for a patent for blockchain-based secure voting system back in February of 2020. This was reported by Zero Hedge. And the patent application says this is a voting system that can use the security of blockchain in the mail to provide a reliable voting system. So a registered voter receives a computer-readable code in the mail. It confirms identity and confirms correct ballot information in an election. The system separates voter identification and votes to ensure voter anonymity and stores votes on a distributed ledger in the blockchain. So that's very interesting that they filed for that. So blockchain technology is supposed to be impervious to fraud. It's very secure just by the nature of how it works. And if you apply it to the voting system, it could really make vote by mail very secure and trustworthy. So very interesting that patent was filed for back in February. And it seems as if Trump and his team have painted the Democrats in a corner. You lose-lose situation. If you want to push vote by mail, you lose because it's running on blockchain technology, impervious to manipulation and fraud. If you want to vote in person, well, the NSA has been working over the last couple of years to make sure the voting machines are not tampered with and things like that. So you damned if you do, damned if you don't. It seems like for the Democrats, it seems like Trump and company were a few steps ahead of them, and that makes me feel better if they roll out this blockchain technology for vote by mail, and it's already in place. Well, game over. So moving on, I want to cover the big peace deal that we heard about earlier this week that Trump brokered between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, two power players in the region there. Did not see this coming, but man, it was a welcome surprise. Should not be surprising though, knowing that knowing what Trump and his team's goal is for the Middle East, which I'll touch on here in a couple minutes. But the UAE decided to normalize relations with Israel. In turn, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu would agree to postpone plans to annex the West Bank. This article says from the American Conservative, this is cold comfort to the Palestinians. They really were not happy to hear about this, obviously, who have made their feelings of betrayal by the UAE known. But realistic diplomacy is not about making everyone happy. It's about pursuing stability. And the deal between Israel and the UAE brokered by the Trump administration is a significant advance in that direction. So awesome to see. I think the next day we heard that the Lebanese president, this was reported by France's BFM television, they asked whether Lebanon was ready to make peace with Israel, and he left the door open, which was really shocking. He said, that depends. We have problems with Israel, and we have to resolve them first. So for a country that's been largely influenced by arch enemies of, Hezbollah, who is an arch enemy of Brazil and really humanity, for the Lebanese president to say that leaves the door open. And I think that that Trump is really looking to broker something with them and other nations around them too. In addition to that, it was announced that Israel and Sudan were very close to a peace deal as well. Some Sudanese officials said. Now that official was fired the next day for saying that, but I think there's some talks underway as well. I don't think they wanted them to be public at the moment. But all this underscores the end game goal of the Trump administration to exit the Middle East. He's talked many times about the endless wars that have cost us billions and trillions of dollars that really don't do any good. And a deeper layer to that is a military-industrial complex who has profited off all the instability and violence in that region for decades. We've instituted regime changes in places like Libya and Iraq that probably didn't need to take place in the manner that they did. And we've set up a system to where we can profit from the oil, the war, the drugs, all the trafficking going on in the Middle East. And Trump wants to end all that, create stability in the region, and then focus our partnerships in terms of oil and natural resources to Venezuela. So that's the ultimate goal. Venezuela is in a really bad situation, but I bet you that the White House and the military are working very hard behind the scenes to again, do something about the murderous socialist Maduro regime and bring stability to that area, and then be able to have access to some of their natural resources. They have huge oil reserves down in Venezuela. So that's the ultimate goal of the Trump administration, to forge new partnerships with a newly reformed Venezuelan regime down there. Next is the Three Gorges Dam in China. This is entering back in the news, not really mainstream here in the U.S., but certainly around the world. But there have been massive flooding in the dam, or in that area, causing the dam to rise to the highest levels in decades. There have been thousands that have been forced to flee that region as well. There's been a lot of speculation that the dam's infrastructure is not sustainable. And if it were to burst, it would be a catastrophic event, putting hundreds of millions of lives at risk. So it is a major, major issue, and I don't know what's going to come of it. So something to keep an eye on. But the important thing is the flooding in the region that's causing tens of thousands of people to flee, and the overall speculation of the dam being at risk. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. Next, we have the National Institute of Health is pressing a U.S. nonprofit who has worked for years with the Wuhan Virology Lab on coronavirus research and things like that. The NIH under the Trump administration is wanting this nonprofit to provide a sample of the coronavirus that Wuhan researchers used to determine the genetic sequence of the virus. So something to keep an eye on here. I know that Trump and his team, they are trying to get to the bottom of the origins of the virus. They have said that they have pointed to the idea that it could have been genetically modified in a lab. There is a lot of compelling evidence from multiple sources suggesting this could be the case. And the fact that China deliberately infected the world in probably the greatest act of a crime against humanity we've ever seen. Trump and the team are trying to get to the bottom of this. The media doesn't really want to touch on it. They're going to be forced to here before too long. But it's something that we got to keep tracking, and hopefully they get the access to that genetic sequence and can get to the bottom of a few questions that they've been asking for a really, really long time. So, so keep an eye on that. We want the truth to come out, and we want those, if there's any malfeasance or corruption, to be held accountable. Then finally, we want to cover real briefly the DNC choosing Kamala to be Biden's running mate in the upcoming election. So, Kamala, not really a surprising pick. She is presentable. She's a minority female. On paper would be a great candidate, but she really, hasn't done much at all to benefit the people or her constituents as senator or as AG. But she was scored as the most liberal U.S. senator in a 2019 analysis by GovTrack. She also has a track record as California's Attorney General of locking up minorities and low-income communities for petty crimes like drug possession and things like that. Sounds like she did that en masse. A lot of people from those communities are speaking out right now against Kamala. And it's been interesting to witness. I didn't really know that before now, but it seemed like when she was the Attorney General, she was just serving an old guard prison industrial system that focused on prison profits over actual rehabilitation of inmates. And Kamala was just subservient to that system. And, so she's, again, on paper looks like a presentable candidate, but her track record speaks for itself. And but again, I think she's kind of a secondary player to the ultimate candidate who's going to be replacing Biden here before too long, I believe, over the next couple months. So something to track as well moving forward. That's all I got this week. I hope you all have a great weekend.